The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest structure ever built by any species in the known universe. Its walls stretched upward for nearly a mile, covered in the flags and symbols of 97 different civilizations. Floating platforms carried delegates from worlds that most humans had never heard of, and the air itself hummed with translation devices, working to convert 1,000 alien languages into something everyone could understand. Ambassador Linda Morrison stood at the human delegation's platform, her hands gripping the railing so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She had spent 20 years representing Earth in this chamber, fighting for humanity's place among the stars. She had celebrated victories and mourned defeats, but nothing had prepared her for what was about to happen. High Arbiter Valethus, a tall creature with silver skin and 4 arms, rose from his seat at the center of the chamber. His species, the Corvani, had founded the Galactic Council over 12,000 years ago. They believed themselves to be the wisest and most fair of all the galaxy's peoples. Linda had learned long ago that this belief was mostly a convenient lie they told themselves. "The matter before us today concerns the species known as humanity," Valethus announced. His voice was calm and measured, as if he were discussing the weather rather than the fate of billions of lives. Earth and its colonies have been found guilty of 3 violations of galactic law. Linda felt her stomach drop. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that reason might prevail. First, Valethus continued, humanity has established unauthorized colonies on 3 worlds in the disputed territories, in direct violation of Council Statute 7749. Second, humanity has refused to allow Council inspectors access to their military facilities in violation of the Transparency Accords. Third, humanity has developed weapons technologies that exceed the limits set by the Arms Limitation Treaty of the Third Age. A murmur ran through the chamber. Linda noticed that many delegates were not surprised by this announcement. They had known it was coming. Some of them had probably helped make it happen. "The punishment for these violations is as follows," Valethus said. "Effective immediately, all trade with human worlds is prohibited. Human vessels are forbidden from using faster-than-light travel beyond the boundaries of the Sol system. All human assets in Council space, including ships, stations, and financial accounts, are to be seized. These sanctions will remain in effect until humanity demonstrates complete compliance with Council law." Linda activated her microphone. "Hi, Arbiter. May I speak?" "You may." She took a deep breath and looked around the chamber. Some faces showed sympathy. Most showed indifference. A few, particularly the insectoid Valkyrie and their allies, showed open hostility.
"Oh."
"These sanctions will kill people," Linda said simply. "Our colony on New Providence depends entirely on imported medicine. Kepler's Hope needs food shipments every 3 months or their population will starve. You are not punishing a government. You are sentencing innocent civilians to death. Perhaps your government should have considered those civilians before breaking our laws," said Ambassador Crixon of the Valkyrie Dominion. His mandibles clicked together in what Linda had learned was the Valkyrie equivalent of a smile. "We colonized empty worlds that no one else wanted," Linda shot back. "We built our own military because we learned the hard way that the Council would not protect us from pirates and raiders. We did what we had to do to survive. And in doing so, you upset the balance of power that has kept peace in this galaxy for millennia," Valethus replied. "Humanity is young, Ambassador. You have been traveling between stars for less than 300 years. You do not understand how delicate the structures of civilization truly are." Linda wanted to scream at him. She wanted to tell him that humanity understood perfectly well. They understood that the Council was not about peace or civilization. It was about control. The older species had built a system that kept them on top and everyone else beneath their feet. Humanity's crime was not breaking laws. Their crime was growing too powerful, too fast. But she said none of this. Instead, she gathered her documents and prepared to leave. "I will relay your decision to Earth," she said quietly. "But I want every delegate in this chamber to remember this moment. Remember that you had a choice. You could have treated humanity as partners. Instead, you chose to treat us as subjects. That choice will have consequences." As she walked toward the exit, Valethus called after her. "What will humanity do, Ambassador?" Will you submit to our judgment? Linda paused at the door and looked back at the assembled delegates of 97 species. For a moment, the entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. We are a stubborn people, High Arbiter. We have fought against oppression before. We have stood against impossible odds and refused to surrender. I cannot tell you what our government will decide, but I can tell you this: humanity does not kneel. She left the chamber without looking back. 12 hours later, on the other side of the galaxy, President Daniel Hayes sat in the underground Situation Room beneath the White House. The original building above had been destroyed in the climate wars of 2089, but the bunkers remained, expanded and modernized over the centuries until they stretched for miles beneath the surface. Around the long table sat the most powerful people on Earth: Secretary of Defense Catherine Price, a stern woman with gray hair and cold eyes; Secretary of State William Porter, who had spent his career believing that diplomacy could solve any problem; Admiral Christopher Blake, commander of the United Earth Navy, and a dozen other officials, generals, and advisors. They had all watched Linda Morrison's confrontation with the Council. They had all heard the terms of the sanctions. 2 billion people in the outer colonies, Catherine said. That's how many will die if we accept these terms. The Council knows this. They're counting on us to surrender rather than watch our own people starve. What choice do we have? William asked. We cannot fight the entire galaxy. They have 3,000 warships. We have 200. We have more than ships, Catherine replied. She pulled up a holographic display showing a map of human space. We have something they don't understand. We have desperation. We have nothing to lose. And we have been preparing for this day for 50 years. President Hayes had been silent throughout the discussion. Now he spoke for the first time. Tell me about Operation Defiance. Catherine nodded. It started in 2187, after the Council refused to help us during the Proxima incident. Our leaders realized then that we could never truly trust the Council to protect us. So we began building in secret. Hidden shipyards, weapons research facilities, strategic reserves of food and medicine, everything we would need to survive on our own. Can we win a war against the Council? The President asked. Honestly, sir, probably not. But we can make them bleed. We can drag this out for years, decades even. And eventually they will realize that the cost of crushing us is higher than the cost of leaving us alone. President Hayes looked around the table. Every face showed the same mixture of fear and determination that he felt in his own heart. Then we fight, he said. God help us all, but we fight. 8. The decision was announced to the public 3 days later. Humanity would not accept the sanctions. Humanity would not surrender its colonies or its sovereignty. If the Galactic Council wanted to bring Earth to its knees, they would have to earn it, across the planet and throughout the colonies. People reacted with a mixture of terror and pride. They knew what was coming. They knew the odds were against them. But they also knew that some things were worth fighting for. Even if victory seemed impossible, the war for humanity's future had begun. The colony ship, Horizon, drifted through the cold darkness of space, its engines running at minimum power to conserve fuel. Captain Samuel Green stood on the bridge watching the sensor display with growing dread. 12 warships had surrounded them, each one bearing the sharp, angular design of the Valkyrie Dominion. They're hailing us again, Captain, said Lieutenant Maria Santos, his first officer. She was young, barely 30 years old, but she had proven herself a dozen times over during their 3 years together. Put them through. The main view screen flickered, and the face of a Valkyrie commander appeared. His exoskeleton was the color of dried blood, and his compound eyes reflected the bridge lights like shattered mirrors. Human vessel. This is Commander Thrixfer of the Valkyrie Patrol Fleet. You are in violation of Galactic Council sanctions. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Your cargo will be confiscated, and your passengers will be transported back to Earth. Samuel gripped the arms of his command chair. The Horizon was carrying 400 colonists bound for New Providence, including nearly 100 children. They had been traveling for 6 weeks, rationing food and water to stretch their supplies. New Providence was only 3 days away. So close, Commander, Samuel said carefully. We are a civilian vessel, carrying humanitarian supplies and colonists. Under the Galactic Charter of Sentient Rights, you have no authority to. The charter has been suspended regarding human vessels, Thrixfer interrupted. You have no rights. You have no protections. You are criminals by the very act of existing in this space. Now surrender, or we will open fire. Samuel muted the channel and turned to Maria. How long until those reinforcements arrive? Maria checked her console. If they got our distress signal, maybe 20 minutes. If they didn't? She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Can we outrun them? Not a chance. They're faster, and they know this region better than we do. We'd be dead in 5 minutes. Samuel closed his eyes. 400 lives depending on him. 100 children who had done nothing wrong except be born human. He thought about his own daughter back on Earth, about the promise he had made to bring these families safely to their new home. Keep them talking, he said finally. Drag this out as long as possible. For 15 agonizing minutes, Samuel negotiated with Commander Thrixfer. He argued. He pleaded. He made up technical problems that required time to fix. He did everything he could think of to buy time for help that might never come. Then, without warning, 3 new contacts appeared on the sensor display. They emerged from faster-than-light travel directly between the Horizon and the Velkari fleet. Their hulls painted black. Their weapon systems already powered up. This is Captain Rebecca Moore of the United Earth Navy destroyer Defiant, a voice announced over the open channel. Valkyrie vessels, you will stand down immediately and allow this civilian ship to pass. Commander Thrixfer made a sound that might have been laughter. You dare threaten us? You have 3 ships. We have 12. The mathematics are not in your favor. Let me tell you about mathematics, Commander, Rebecca replied. Her voice was calm, almost casual, like she was discussing the weather. My ships are carrying Prometheus-class torpedoes. Each one contains enough antimatter to destroy a small moon. I have 47 torpedoes. You have 12 ships. Now, I'm not great at math, but I think that works out pretty badly for you. Silence on the channel. Furthermore, Rebecca continued, as of 1600 hours today, the United Earth's government has officially withdrawn from the Galactic Council. Your sanctions no longer apply to us because we no longer recognize your authority. We are not members of your little club anymore. We are a sovereign nation, and you are currently threatening our citizens. Samuel watched the sensor display as the Velkari ships began to move. For a terrible moment, he thought they were going to attack anyway. Then, one by one, they powered down their weapons and began to withdraw. This is not over, Thrixfer growled. Your species will regret this defiance, maybe Rebecca said, but not today. Horizon, you are clear to proceed to New Providence. Safe travels. The Valkyrie fleet disappeared into faster than light, leaving the human ships alone in the darkness. On the bridge of the Horizon, Maria Santos let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like hours. Captain, she said quietly. I think I need to sit down, Samuel laughed, releasing the tension that had built up in his chest. Me too. And I think I owe Captain Moore the biggest bottle of wine I can find. The news of humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council spread across the galaxy within hours. It was the first time in 4,000 years that any species had voluntarily left the Council. The reaction was immediate and intense. In the Council chambers, emergency sessions were called. Delegates shouted at each other in a dozen languages. High Arbiter Velthus tried to maintain order, but even his considerable authority was being tested. They cannot simply leave, insisted the Torvak representative, a hulking creature covered in thick scales. The Council is the foundation of galactic civilization. Without membership, they are nothing. And yet they have observed the delegate from the merchant guilds, a small being with large eyes and nimble fingers, and they seem quite prepared to defend that decision. The question is, what do we do about it? Ambassador Crixon rose to speak, his mandibles clicking with agitation. There is only one response to such defiance. War. We must crush them quickly and completely. Before other species get the idea that rebellion is acceptable, War against humanity would be costly, warned another delegate. They are young, but they are fierce. The Velkari know this better than anyone. Crixin, eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting that my people are afraid of these mammals? I am suggesting that wisdom sometimes looks like caution. The debate continued for 3 days. Arguments were made on both sides. Economic considerations were weighed against strategic concerns. Some species advocated for a peaceful resolution, pointing out that humanity had been a productive member of galactic society for nearly 2 centuries. Others demanded immediate military action to restore order and demonstrate the consequences of disobedience. In the end, the vote was close but decisive. 63 species voted in favor of military action against humanity. 29 voted against. 5 abstained. The Galactic Council had declared war on Earth. President Hayes received the news in his office late at night. He had expected it, of course. They all had. But expecting something and experiencing it were very different things. How long do we have? He asked Secretary Price. Intelligence estimates that the Council fleet will need 3 to 4 weeks to mobilize. They're gathering at the Arcturus staging point, about 200 light-years from our outer colonies and our forces. We've recalled all ships to defensive positions. 180 combat-capable vessels protecting Earth and the inner colonies. Another 60 in the outer territories. 240 ships against 3,000, the president said quietly. Those are not good odds. Catherine nodded. No, sir. They are not. But we have advantages they don't expect. We've been preparing for this for half a century. Hidden weapons. Secret bases. Strategies that nobody has ever tried before. We can't win a straight fight, but we don't have to. We just have to make the war so painful that they decide we're not worth the trouble. President Hayes looked out the window at the night sky. Somewhere up there, among all those distant stars, an armada was assembling to destroy everything humanity had built, everything they had dreamed of. Then that's what we'll do, he said. We'll make them regret the day they decided to pick a fight with Earth. The war for the future of humanity was about to begin in earnest, and the galaxy would never be the same. The first major battle of the war came 6 weeks after the Council's declaration. A fleet of 130 enemy ships, primarily Valkyrie cruisers supported by Torvak destroyers, entered the Kepler system with orders to capture or destroy humanity's largest agricultural colony. Kepler's hope was home to nearly 300 million people. Its farms produced enough food to supply a dozen other worlds. Losing it would be a devastating blow. Rear Admiral Patricia Vance commanded the defense force. She had only 24 ships under her command, barely enough to crew a proper patrol squadron in normal times. But these were not normal times. And Patricia was not an ordinary commander. She had positioned her fleet within the dense asteroid belt that ringed the outer edge of the Kepler system. From the outside, it looked like a terrible tactical decision. The asteroids blocked clear firing lines and made coordinated movement nearly impossible. Any sensible admiral would have chosen open space for the confrontation. But Patricia was counting on her enemies to think exactly that. Enemy. Fleet entering the asteroid belt, reported Commander Nathan Cole, her tactical officer. They're spreading out to navigate the debris field. Perfect, Patricia said. Signal the mining stations. Execute Protocol 7. Throughout the asteroid belt, hidden transmitters powered up. They were not weapons in any traditional sense. They were electromagnetic pulse generators, the same technology used by mining corporations to disable rogue equipment. But scaled up to military size, they became something far more dangerous. The pulse hit the Council fleet like an invisible hammer. Shield generators overloaded. Navigation computers crashed. Communication systems filled with static. 3 Valkyrie cruisers, suddenly blind and confused, collided with asteroids before their crews could regain control. 2 more were hit by debris from their destroyed companions. All ships attack, Patricia ordered. Her 24 ships surged forward from their hiding positions among the rocks. They moved in tight formations, coordinating through laser communication systems that were unaffected by the pulse. Their targets were already chosen, the largest enemy vessels, the ones that posed the greatest threat. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. Human destroyers darted between asteroids, using the debris field as cover while they launched torpedo after torpedo at the confused enemy fleet. Valkyrie gunners tried to track them, but their targeting systems were still recovering from the pulse. Most of their shots went wild, striking rocks instead of ships. Commander Thrixfer, the same officer who had confronted the Horizon weeks earlier, found himself in command of the enemy fleet after the flagship was destroyed in the initial chaos. He was an experienced warrior, respected among his people for his cunning and his ruthlessness. But nothing in his long career had prepared him for this. How are they doing this? He demanded, watching another of his cruisers explode on the view screen. They have 20 ships. We have over 100. Their tactics are unprecedented, Commander, his aide replied. They seem to know exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. Thrixfer made a decision. Signal the fleet. We are withdrawing. Commander, we cannot. We are leaving, Thrixfer said firmly. We have lost nearly 40 ships. The humans have lost perhaps 6. If we stay, we will lose everything. We retreat now and return with a larger force and better preparation. The Valkyrie fleet withdrew from the Kepler system 3 hours after they had entered it. They left behind the wreckage of 38 ships and nearly 15,000 dead. Humanity had lost 7 vessels and just over 200 crew members. It was not a complete victory. The enemy would return, stronger and more careful. But it was enough to prove something that the galaxy had not believed possible. Humanity could fight. Humanity could win. News of the battle spread through human space like wildfire. On Earth, crowds gathered in the streets to celebrate. On distant colonies, people who had been preparing for the worst allowed themselves a moment of hope. Soldiers who had expected to die defending their homes began to believe they might actually survive. But the celebrations were short-lived. The Council was not accustomed to losing. They responded to the defeat at Kepler with renewed fury. 3 weeks later, a massive fleet of 200 ships attacked New Providence. This time, the Council commanders had learned from their mistakes. They entered the system carefully, scanning for traps and ambushes. They brought specialized ships equipped with countermeasures against electromagnetic pulses. They were determined to demonstrate that the victory at Kepler had been a fluke. Admiral Christopher Blake coordinated the defense from Earth Station Prime. He had 40 ships to work with, nearly twice what Patricia had commanded at Kepler, but still vastly outnumbered by the enemy force. They're being cautious, he observed, watching the tactical display. They learned from Kepler. Yes, sir, replied Commander Nicole Patterson, his aide, but we have something they don't expect. The defense of New Providence relied on a different strategy entirely. Instead of fighting in space, the human forces drew the enemy toward the planet itself. They retreated in good order, making the Council fleet believe they were winning. They let the enemy position their ships in orbit, ready to begin landing troops. Then they triggered the volcanoes. New Providence was a geologically active world, covered in hundreds of dormant volcanic sites. Human engineers had spent years planting deep core charges at carefully selected locations. When those charges detonated, 23 volcanoes erupted simultaneously, sending massive clouds of ash and debris into the atmosphere. For ships in low orbit, the effect was catastrophic. Their sensors were blinded by the debris. Their shields were overwhelmed by the constant bombardment of rocks and superheated gas. Engines choked on volcanic ash. Within hours, the carefully positioned invasion fleet was in chaos. Human ships emerged from behind the planet's moon and attacked the disorganized enemy. They struck fast and hard, destroying transport ships and supply vessels. They cut communication lines between the fleet and its commanders. They turned what should have been a simple invasion into a desperate fight for survival. The Council fleet eventually retreated. Having lost 64 ships and all hope of capturing New Providence, but the victory came at a cost. The volcanic eruptions had devastated large areas of the planet's surface. 3 cities had been destroyed. Nearly 1 million people had lost their homes. On Earth, President Hayes addressed the planet. His face was tired, his voice heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. Today we won another battle, he said, but let no one mistake this for easy. We have paid a terrible price for our freedom. Soldiers have died. Civilians have suffered, and the war is far from over. He paused, gathering himself. But we have proven something important. We have proven that courage and determination can overcome superior numbers. We have proven that we will not surrender, no matter the cost. And we have proven that humanity is not the weak, inferior species that the Council believed us to be. In the months that followed, similar battles played out across human space. At Proxima Station, single carrier group held off 50 enemy ships for 12 days using drone swarms and hit-and-run tactics. At the mining colonies of Beta Cygni, human engineers collapsed tunnel systems onto invading ground forces, burying thousands of enemy soldiers alive. At the trade hub of Meridian, civilian cargo ships were converted into improvised warships and used to ambush a Torvac supply convoy. Each battle was different. Each battle required new tactics, new sacrifices, new acts of heroism. But through it all, one thing remained constant. Humanity refused to break. The galaxy began to take notice. Species that had voted for war now questioned that decision. Merchants and traders who depended on human goods lobbied for peace. And in the darker corners of Council space, whispers began to spread about the small, stubborn species that had dared to defy the combined might of 97 civilizations. The Council had expected the war to last weeks. It had already lasted months, and there was no end in sight. In the chambers of the Velkari Dominion, Ambassador Crixon stared at reports of the latest defeats and felt something he had not experienced in 10,000 years of galactic dominance. He felt fear. 9 months into the war, the tide began to shift in ways that nobody had predicted. The Council's massive numerical advantage meant nothing if they could not bring it to bear effectively. Their ships were designed for overwhelming force, for crushing opponents through sheer weight of numbers. They had no experience fighting an enemy that refused to stand still and be destroyed. Humanity, on the other hand, had spent its entire history fighting against impossible odds. They knew how to improvise. They knew how to adapt. And they knew that sometimes the only way to win was to fight dirty. Lieutenant Commander Jason Miller led a team of 16 special operations soldiers through the ventilation system of a Valkyrie supply depot on the moon of Arcturus IV. They had been crawling through metal ducts for nearly 3 hours, moving slowly and carefully to avoid detection. Their target was the fuel storage facility that kept the Council's forward fleet operational. Jason was 34 years old, a farm kid from Kansas who had joined the military to pay for college and ended up becoming one of the most effective covert operatives in human space. He had lost count of how many missions he had completed behind enemy lines. He tried not to think about how many more might be waiting for him. "Charges set," whispered Sergeant Amy Lopez, the team's demolitions expert. She was small, dark-haired, and possessed an almost artistic talent for making things explode. "Good work," Jason replied through his helmet communicator. "Everyone converge on Extraction Point Delta. We have 4 minutes." They had planned every second of this mission. They knew exactly which corridors would be patrolled, which security systems needed to be bypassed, which exits would be clear. What they had not planned for was the Valkyrie patrol that happened to take a shortcut through the maintenance tunnels at exactly the wrong moment. The alarm started screaming. 30 seconds before they reached the extraction. "Shuttle, go loud," Jason ordered. "Weapons free." What followed was 90 seconds of brutal, close-quarters combat. Human soldiers fighting with rifles and blades against Valkyrie warriors in their own territory. The narrow corridors favored neither side, turning the engagement into a bloody, chaotic mess. Specialist Tommy Rodriguez took a Valkyrie blade through his shoulder but kept fighting with his pistol in his other hand. Corporal Lisa Park used a thermal grenade to collapse a tunnel section, buying precious seconds for the rest of the team to reach the shuttle. Private Danny Kim died, covering their retreat. His final act, to pull the pins on every grenade he carried. When the shuttle lifted off, 11 of the 16 team members were still alive. Jason carried 2 of the wounded personally, refusing to leave anyone behind. Behind them, the charges detonated. The fuel depot erupted in a fireball visible from orbit, consuming enough supplies to power the Council fleet for 3 months. Mission accomplished, Jason reported to headquarters. His voice was flat, emotionless. He had learned long ago not to feel things during operations. The feelings came later in the quiet moments, in the nightmares that never seemed to stop. Across human space, similar operations were taking place every day. Sabotage teams struck at supply lines. Electronic warfare specialists disrupted enemy communications. Intelligence agents recruited informants among species that had grown tired of Council dominance. It was not the kind of war that made for exciting stories or glorious victories. It was a slow, grinding war of attrition, fought in shadows and secrets, but it was working. The Council's economy was beginning to crack. Trade disruptions caused shortages on dozens of worlds. Military spending had tripled since the war began, diverting resources from everything else. Species that had been content with Council rule began to question whether the war was worth the cost. On Earth, President Hayes received a message through diplomatic back channels. The Council wanted to negotiate. "It's a trap," Catherine Price said flatly. "They want to buy time to regroup," maybe the president replied. "But we can't afford to ignore it. If there's any chance of ending this without more bloodshed, we have to take it." The negotiations were held at Station Omega, a neutral trading post at the edge of Council space. The human delegation included Admiral Blake, Ambassador Morrison, and Captain Rebecca Moore, who had become a symbol of human resistance after her confrontation with the Valkyrie Fleet 9 months earlier. Across the table sat High Arbiter Valethus, Ambassador Crixon, and representatives from the 7 largest Council species. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "We are prepared to lift all sanctions," Valethus began. "In exchange, humanity will return to the Council and accept oversight of your military and colonial expansion." Linda Morrison shook her head. "That is exactly what you demanded before the war. Why would we accept now what we rejected then?" "Because the alternative is continued conflict," Valethus replied. "Despite your impressive resistance, you cannot win this war. Eventually our numbers will overwhelm you, will they?" Rebecca Moore spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the authority of someone who had looked death in the face and refused to blink. "You've been saying that for 9 months. We're still here. Your colonies are suffering. Your economy is strained. How much longer can you maintain this pace?" "Longer than you think," Linda replied. "And here's something you don't know. 17 non-aligned species have approached us about forming alternative trade agreements. The merchant guilds are threatening to break from the Council entirely. There are rumors of civil unrest on Valkyrie Prime." She smiled coldly. "You're not the only ones who are suffering." Crixon slammed his clawed hand on the table. "This is unacceptable. The Valkyrie will never submit to blackmail by inferior species." "Then keep fighting," Rebecca said simply. "But understand that every month this war continues, your empire gets weaker. Every battle we survive, more species start to wonder if maybe the Council isn't as invincible as you've been telling everyone for 12,000 years." The silence that followed stretched. "For nearly a minute, what exactly are you proposing?" Valethus asked finally. Linda slid a datapad across the table. "Our terms: full recognition of all human colonies as sovereign territory, complete lifting of all sanctions without conditions, voting rights in the Council equal to the 5 founding species, and reparations for every civilian who died because of your trade embargo." Valethus read the document, and his silver skin seemed to pale. "These terms would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy." "Yes," Linda said. "They would. That's the point. Cannot agree to this. The Council would never accept such conditions. We have nothing more to discuss." Linda stood up, and her delegation rose with her. "You have 48 hours to reconsider. After that, we resume offensive operations. And Ambassador, you should know that we've been holding back. If the war continues, we won't be content with defending our own space anymore. We'll take the fight to yours." The human delegation left the station without looking back. On the shuttle ride home, Rebecca Moore turned to Linda Morrison. "Do Do you think they'll accept? Linda stared out the window at the distant stars. I don't know. But I meant what I said. We've been fighting defensively this whole time, reacting to their moves. If they reject our terms, we go on the offensive. We show them what humanity is truly capable of. And if that doesn't work, Linda's expression hardened, then we make sure they never forget the price of trying to destroy us. Whatever happens, the galaxy will remember what we did here. They'll remember that one small species stood against the entire council and refused to surrender. And maybe, just maybe, that memory will inspire others to do the same. The shuttle flew on toward Earth, carrying the hopes and fears of 8 billion people toward an uncertain future. The council's response came exactly 47 hours after the negotiations ended. It was not the answer humanity had hoped for, but it was the answer they had expected. High Arbiter Valthus rejected every major demand and insisted that humanity return to the negotiating table with more realistic expectations. President Hayes read the message and sighed. They still don't understand. They will, Catherine Price replied. Soon, Operation Thunder began 72 hours later. For the first time since the war began, human forces went on the offensive. Strike fleets emerged from hidden bases throughout the galaxy, hitting targets that the Council had believed were beyond reach. Supply convoys were destroyed. Communication relay stations were captured. Remote outposts were overwhelmed before reinforcements could arrive. The Velkari homeworld itself came under attack. Not invasion. That would have been impossible with human resources. But a coordinated strike by special operations teams destroyed 3 orbital shipyards and damaged a dozen more. The psychological impact was devastating. The Velkari had not faced an attack on their home system in over 8,000 years. At the same time, human diplomats were busy with a different kind of warfare. The 17 species that had expressed interest in alternative trade agreements were formally invited to join a new organization, the Coalition of Free Worlds. Unlike the Council, this coalition would operate on principles of equality and mutual respect. No species would dominate the others. No votes would carry more weight based on age or power. 7 species accepted immediately. Another 5 joined within the month. The merchant guilds, after lengthy internal debate, announced their withdrawal from the Council in their eye. Intention to trade freely with all parties regardless of political affiliation. In the Council chambers, chaos reigned. Delegations that had voted for war now demanded peace. Species that had supported the Velkari now questioned that alliance. The unity that had defined galactic civilization for 12,000 years was crumbling before their eyes. Valthus called an emergency session. We must end this conflict immediately, he announced. The very foundations of the Council are at risk. Ended how? Demanded the Torvak representative. The humans have rejected our terms. They seem determined to fight until they achieve their goals. Then we must accept their terms, Valthus said quietly, or at least negotiate in good faith to find a compromise. Crixon rose from his seat, his mandibles clicking with fury. The Velkari will never surrender to these mammals. If the Council lacks the courage to see this war through, then perhaps the Velkari should reconsider their membership. Perhaps you should, said a voice from across the chamber. It belonged to Ambassador Trellos of the Corvani, the same species as Valthus, but from a different political faction. Your arrogance started this war. Your miscalculations have prolonged it. And now you threaten to leave, rather than accept the consequences of your failures. The argument that followed nearly came to physical violence. Security forces had to intervene to separate the Velkari delegation from several other species. It was the most serious breakdown of order in the Council's history. 3 days later, Valthus sent a new message to Earth. The Council was prepared to negotiate without preconditions. The final peace conference lasted for 2 weeks. It was held on Earth itself, in a newly constructed facility outside of Geneva. Human negotiators worked around the clock, hammering out details with their Council counterparts. There were shouting matches and walkouts. There were moments when the entire process seemed about to collapse. But in the end, an agreement was reached. The Treaty of Geneva, as it came to be known, gave humanity most of what they had demanded. All sanctions were lifted permanently. Human colonies were recognized as sovereign territory. Earth gained significant voting power in a reformed council structure. Reparations were paid to the families of those who had died during the embargo. In exchange, humanity agreed to return to the council and work within its frameworks, albeit with greatly expanded rights and protections. They also agreed to share certain technologies that could benefit all species, including medical advances and agricultural techniques. The war was over. Humanity had won. President Hayes addressed the planet on the day the treaty was signed. His hair had gone completely gray during the 14 months of conflict, and his face showed every one of his 63 years. But his voice was strong and clear. Today we celebrate not just the end of a war, but the beginning of a new era. For the first time in galactic history, a single species has stood against the combined might of the Council and forced them to negotiate as equals. We did not achieve this through superior numbers or advanced technology. We achieved it through courage, determination, and the refusal to accept our own destruction. He paused, looking directly into the camera. We must never forget the cost. 16,000 soldiers died defending our worlds. Nearly 3 million civilians perished from the sanctions and the fighting. Entire cities were destroyed. Families were torn apart. We won, but we paid a terrible price for that victory. Let us honor their sacrifice by building a future worthy of their memory. Let us create a galaxy where no species is forced to choose between submission and war. Let us prove that humanity's strength lies not just in our ability to fight, but in our capacity to build, to create, to bring different peoples together in common purpose. The celebrations lasted for days. On Earth, people danced in the streets and embraced strangers. On distant colonies, families who had feared they might never see their loved ones again were reunited. Soldiers who had expected to die came home to heroes' welcomes. In the months that followed, the galaxy began to transform. The coalition of free worlds grew steadily, eventually including over 30 species. The reformed Galactic Assembly, as the Council came to be called, adopted new rules that gave smaller species greater voice and protection. The old systems of dominance and control began to crumble, replaced by something closer to genuine cooperation. Ambassador Linda Morrison became the first human to serve as High Arbiter of the Galactic Assembly. Under her leadership, the organization evolved from a tool of control into something approaching a genuine interstellar democracy. She served for 15 years before retiring to write her memoirs, which became required reading in schools across the galaxy. Admiral Blake returned to Earth and lived quietly in a small house by the ocean. He spent his final years teaching young officers and tending his garden. Rarely speaking about the war except to those who had been there with him, Captain Rebecca Moore became Admiral Moore and took command of the newly formed Rapid Response Fleet. She spent the rest of her career ensuring that no species would ever again face the kind of threat that humanity had overcome. She was stern, demanding, and absolutely relentless in her standards. Her students loved her for it on New Providence, the colony that had been saved by volcanic eruptions. A memorial was built to honor those who had died in the war. It was a simple structure, a wall of black stone covered with names. Standing in a garden that bloomed year-round with flowers from 100 different worlds, Captain Samuel Green visited every year. On the anniversary of the day, the horizon had been surrounded by Valkyrie warships. He would walk slowly along the wall, reading the names, remembering the faces of people he had known and lost. One year, a young woman approached him. She was perhaps 19, with dark hair and serious eyes. "Captain Green," she asked hesitantly, to Samuel these days. "I've been retired for a long time. My grandmother told me about you." She was on the horizon. "She said you kept everyone calm when we were surrounded. She said you gave them hope." Samuel smiled sadly. "I was terrified. I just tried not to show it. That's what courage is, isn't it? Being scared, but doing the right thing anyway." He looked at her for a long moment. "You sound like someone who's thinking about joining up." She nodded. "The academy. I want to be a pilot. It's a hard life. You'll see things you can't unsee. You'll lose people you care about. And sometimes you'll have to make choices that haunt you forever." "I know," she said. "But somebody has to do it. Somebody has to stand between people and the things that would hurt them. That's what you did, isn't it? Samuel thought about all the years since the war, all the changes he had witnessed, all the lives that had been made possible because humanity had refused to surrender. Yes, he said finally. I suppose it is. Good luck to you, young lady. I hope you find what you're looking for out there among the stars. She thanked him and walked away, leaving him alone with the memorial. He stayed until sunset, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, humanity was still growing, still exploring, still building. They had chosen to fight when fighting was the only honorable choice. They had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. And in doing so, they had changed the galaxy forever. The story of that choice would echo through history for thousands of years. It would inspire other species to stand up for their rights. It would remind the powerful that strength was not the same as dominance. And it would serve as proof that courage, determination, and the refusal to surrender could triumph against any odds. Samuel Green smiled as the first stars appeared overhead. Whatever challenges the future might bring, he knew that humanity would face them the same way. They had faced everything else, together, unbroken, and utterly unwilling to kneel.